Well, hey y'all, welcome back. This is your guide to weight loss, and in today's lesson, we are going to talk about why we gain weight so as to hopefully better understand how we can lose it. Have you ever stopped to think, why do we get fat in the first place? The instinctive answer is because we eat too much, right? But why would we do that from an evolutionary perspective? Why would we eat so much that we would get fat? Having extra weight on our body makes us slower, makes us more prone to chronic diseases. Frankly, it just doesn't make sense that it would even happen to us, like on a species level. So why on earth are so many of us becoming obese? I think in order to understand that, you need to understand what are the mechanisms in our body that make us shape the way that we are in the first place. Well, genetics, right? We have a code that determines how tall we're going to be, what our build is going to be, where our body fat is going to be distributed, whether or not we have breasts, right? That's part of our genetic code. And the way that our body is able to express that genetic code is at least partially dominated by our hormones. So our body releases hormones at certain levels, and those hormones tell our body, tell our bones, tell our fat, like where to go, how big to grow, right? It's a beautifully designed system. So for the purposes of what we're talking about, which is weight loss, hormones play a crucial role in how we gain weight, why we gain weight, and how we eventually, hopefully, will lose weight. So a fair question might be, why would our bodies be releasing hormones that are causing us to gain a significant amount of weight, like way more than the little extra that we might need during like a lean winter? What exactly has hijacked our systems so that we no longer can pretty much be guaranteed to have the lean, fit, full of stamina bodies that our ancestors had? Why on earth are so many of us coded to be so fat? You don't see animals looking up apps to see how much they're supposed to eat. Other animals out in the wild naturally know when to stop eating, unless, of course, they're eating what we do. And that, my friends, is the problem. What we're eating. The problem is not that half of the country miraculously just lost their willpower and somehow within a few generations have no ability to stop eating past the point of satiation anymore. No. The problem is our food supply is basically poisoning us. It is making us all sick, less healthy. When we have extra weight on our body, we are more prone to diabetes, heart disease, multiple different cancers, sleeping disorders, anxiety, depression, reflux, chronic pain, autoimmune diseases. When we eat the way that we've been eating, we get sick. Our food supply is poisoning us. There's really no other way to look at it. So the logical question is, which foods are making us sick? Surely we have to eat, right? That is part of the deal here. We need food to survive. If we look at how recently the obesity problem came to be, then really what you need to look at is the foods that were introduced in that time frame, how recently those came to be. It's the newer foods that are making us sick, the ultra-processed foods that are coming out of factories. I think instinctively we all kind of know this already, but it's worth taking a look at. Sometimes we get caught up in our own stories and we see our own problem with our weight as being unique to us and somehow our fault or our problem or our issue that we have to work through. But when you've got a species-wide problem, which is what overweight and obesity is becoming, then it really is less about the individual at that point. And you really need to take a macro look at what is going on that is making so many of us so sick. And the very logical conclusion is it's what we're eating. If the logical answer is it is the ultra processed foods specifically, the high carbohydrate ultra processed foods, why? Why are they making us sick? Well, the reason is because of our hormones. Hormones are what determine the distribution of body fat. So when you look at, why people are putting fat on, you need to look at the hormones that are governing that fat. And the problem seems to be that our hormones have evolved in people that lived in a world that did not have high concentrations of carbohydrate available at basically an infinite level, like an unexhaustible level like we do now. Highly concentrated carbohydrates or sugar sources were just not as abundant back in the day. I mean, I currently live in Pennsylvania. I go outside all the time to walk in the woods. Now, in the woods that are, within a mile from my house, I can walk in there for like an hour and a half, and the only edible things that I'm going to see in that time frame this time of year is deer, maybe some squirrels, a rabbit every now and again, and some sketchy looking mushrooms that I'm gonna be honest with you that I probably wouldn't try, but maybe some, back in the day, if people knew what they were doing, might give it a chance. There might be some foraging opportunities. We have some nut trees, so there might be some walnuts or chestnuts lying about, but that's it. Basically, there's not a whole lot of sugar sources laying about, is what I'm saying. And wherever you are in the world, go outside, look around. Not inside your local store, but just outside. Like, what do you see? Maybe you live in a tropical environment and there's all kinds of fruit. Is it always ripe? Is it always available? Or are there seasons for that? Like, that's a real question. I honestly don't know. I'm not a farmer, okay? But what I do know is that there are big parts of the world that do not have highly concentrated sugar supplies all the time. And so when our ancestors evolved in that environment, our bodies really never had to come up with a solution to that food supply. So if our bodies did find things like fruits or berries or tubers or honey or maple syrup or whatever, it was limited. They were small amounts that were available for a short period of time. And that was it. We didn't have an endless supply, but now we do. And it really seems like the way that we tend to get fat is by eating too much of those things on a consistent basis over time. Our bodies are happiest when we have 1 teaspoon of sugar floating around in our blood supply at any given time. That's it. And it really wants to keep it that way too. Glucose, much like most of our electrolytes, has a very tight kind of window that it likes to stay in. And just like the other electrolytes, if it goes too high or too low, we're not well. We get sick, or in some cases we die, right? Our potassium goes too high, we die. Our potassium goes even a little low, we don't feel so good. Same with our sodium. So our bodies have evolved over time to keep us in what's called homeostasis, or a nice baseline balance that has the sweet spot where we function best. And sugar is no different. There is a sweet spot that sweet spot. Yes, I am that silly. There is a sweet spot, though, of sugar in your body that it wants you to stay in. So if you only need to have about a teaspoon at any given time, if you ever eat more than a teaspoon, then your body has some work to do to take care of it. Let's say we eat a highly concentrated sugary meal, like we eat pasta, or we eat cookies, or we eat bread. We eat anything that raises our blood sugar quickly. When we eat that highly concentrated carbohydrate meal and have that sugar spike, our body needs to have a mechanism to deal with it. It has to have a hormone to deal with it in this case, and that hormone is insulin. So when we eat a meal that, brings that 1 teaspoon that it wants to have way higher than that. Our body knows that that has happened, just like it knows when any of our levels are abnormal, and it has mechanisms in place to fix it. In this case, that mechanism is releasing insulin. Insulin's job is to unlock our cells so that the sugar can flow into them. That sugar is either immediately used, it is stored either in our liver or our muscles as a form of sugar called glycogen that can be used very quickly, or it can be stored all over the darn place as fat. That is where a lot of our fat comes from. It comes from overeating carbohydrates and that sugar being stored as future energy. And because we didn't evolve with this endless supply of carbohydrates available to us like we have now, our bodies never developed a fail-safe of what to do if we have so many carbohydrates that we're producing so much fat for storage. It never evolved in an environment that there was so much food available that it had to have a mechanism to stop storing extra fat. So it doesn't. There doesn't even appear to be an upper limit of how much fat we can store on our body, because our bodies were actually way more at risk of having not enough food, of surviving famines and winters and times where, we didn't have anything to eat. So that is what it leaned on from an evolutionary perspective to protect us against. It never needed to figure out what to do with too much food. It was never a problem that it really encountered. Having too much food wasn't a problem that it needed to learn how to deal with. Unfortunately, that's not even where the problem ends. Because here's the thing. When our blood sugar goes up and our body releases insulin to get that sugar out of the blood and into the cells, basically elsewhere, so that the sugar in our blood isn't above that 1 teaspoon where it wants to be, the cells in our body are being forced to take on more energy than they need. If we are eating way more sugar than our body was designed to handle, when insulin is trying to put it everywhere, our body is getting overloaded. And over time, if that keeps happening, i.e. if we keep eating a diet very highly concentrated and refined carbohydrates, our tissues start to get a little sick of it, right? They're like, hey, insulin, thanks, but no thanks, but we don't want any more of your sugar. And so they start to become what's called resistant to insulin, so it doesn't quite work as well. So whereas insulin used to be this nuanced little hormone that your body could release just like a little speck of to get your sugar to come down, over time, after having a high carbohydrate diet, it doesn't work like that anymore. Insulin will be released at the same levels, but your tissues won't allow it to unlock their cells to get the sugar into them. And your body, recognizing that your sugar is not going down the way it should with its release of insulin, just releases more. It basically goes from a tiny tap on the door like, hey guys, want some sugar? It's insulin, to, pounding on the door. Hey guys, you're taking this sugar whether you want it or not. And that is where insulin resistance comes from. And over time, the insulin that used to be, the levels that used to be fine to get sugar into your tissues is no longer nearly adequate. And the insulin in your body starts to go up and up and up and up until you're basically like drowning in insulin. So as that insulin is going up and up and up, that sugar is being converted into fat that whole time. Insulin is going up and your body fat is going up at the same time. When you have extra body fat, what you're basically looking at is your carbohydrate storage. That's all the excess that your body couldn't use as you've been eating it over the course of your lifetime up to this point. Some of it got used at the time, but then the rest was turned to fat. That's where it came from. Now we've got the circumstance that we have too much carbohydrates going into our body. We've got insulin that's through the roof. We've got fat that's being stored over time. And eventually, like I said, you're drowning in insulin. That situation does kind of have a breaking point. Although there doesn't seem to be an upper limit of how much fat your body can store, there does seem to be an upper limit of how much insulin that your body can dump into your bloodstream and still have it effectively lower your blood sugar against the insulin resistance of your tissues. After a while, I've heard that it takes up to 10 years for this to happen. It's just not enough. You can be swimming in insulin, and if you continue to eat high carbohydrates, your body is no longer to keep you down to that 1 teaspoon of sugar anymore. Your sugar starts to rise. That's when you start getting diagnosed with prediabetes and diabetes. Even though your body is producing so much insulin, it cannot keep up with the amount of refined carbohydrates that you're putting into it on a regular basis. And so now you have diabetes. We're not going to be talking about diabetes because this is a show about weight loss, just so you know that that's the general next step. I have talked to plenty of people and taken care of plenty of people that have a lot of extra weight on their body that are not diabetic. We'll check their fasting blood sugar, we'll check their A1C, their numbers will be normal. If we go a little deeper and we check their fasting insulin, usually the writing is on the wall, that's on its way. And if you're curious, getting your fasting insulin checked is a good indicator of how far along you are on this path. But like I said, that's a whole nother set of problems we're not dealing with today. We're talking about weight loss here. And before I can tell you how to get out of this insulin overabundance mess, I need to give you kind of the rest of the bad news. Because we have such high insulin to deal with all of these carbs, the unfortunate part of that hormone is it makes us hungrier, and it specifically makes us hungrier for carbs. So it is a vicious cycle that perpetuates itself. And over time, we tend to get more and more extra fat on our body. When you are trying to lose weight, when you're trying to break out of this cycle, you, my friend, are trying to battle against your own hormones. The call is coming from inside the house, you guys. This is not a great scenario for us. And think about it. Hormones are incredibly powerful, and your best defense against hormones is supposed to be willpower? Really? When you have hunger that's so strong that you feel like you're gonna die if you don't eat, your best defense to lose weight is to just not eat. That's our strategy for weight loss. That's really what we're depending on for people day after day after day to force themselves to not eat past that hunger. Really? And we wonder why people can't do it. I don't wonder. I can see in a crystal clear way why we have such a hard time losing weight. Battling this cycle is incredibly hard, especially if you have no idea that that's what's happening to you. How on earth are people supposed to break out of this cycle if they don't even understand that this cycle exists? As far as I can tell, if you don't understand that you're battling against this incredibly powerful hormone, then you don't really stand a chance to lose weight. That's been my experience. So if I've told you that the problem that you're having with your weight loss is that your insulin has gotten way too high, and you've got this vicious cycle of high sugar, high insulin, fat storage, high hunger, craving of sweets, how on earth do you break out of that cycle? How on earth do you get your insulin back down to manageable levels? Well, how do we get into this mess in the first place? We have been eating way too many refined carbohydrates, way more than our bodies can handle. So it's got to go. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know. I am so sorry. But it would be incredibly difficult to get your insulin back down without stopping the source of what caused it to go up in the first place. Basically, every time you have a high carbohydrate meal, you are perpetuating this cycle. It's just the way it is. Don't shoot the messenger. Now, I know this is tough news. I assure you it has been tough news for me. It is something that I have battled to get a handle on for many, many, many years. And I still have more bad news for you. I'm so sorry. It's not funny. It's really, really hard. But I think if you understand what you're up against, you're better able to understand why you've had such a hard time for so long to get yourself out of this mess, right? To get that extra weight that you have obtained through this process back off of your body. So here's the rest of the bad news. Not only do you need to get the refined carbs in your diet down to a level so that you can reduce how much insulin your body is producing, which by the way is not immediate. It is going to take some time. It took a long time for your body to start producing that much insulin. It's also going to take a long time for your body to normalize, if it ever will, back down to those, the levels that you were basically designed to have, where your body was super sensitive to the effect of insulin. Getting it down is going to take eating less refined carbohydrates, but that's not all. You have a debt to repay. All those years of eating more carbohydrates than your body needed, that your body then stored as fat, you got to use that fat, right? You got to kind of pay the piper and not only not eat enough carbohydrates that your insulin goes up, but you even have to create some sort of deficit in your body to use the sort of energy that you already have. Does that deficit need to only come from carbohydrates? No, you can just reduce calories. However, if you continue to eat a bunch of carbohydrates as part of that calorie reduction, then you are going to be battling against hunger because your insulin is going to stay up as you continue to eat carbohydrates. So is it possible to lose weight with calorie reduction? Yes. Is it comfortable? Well, you tell me. How successful have you been when you've tried to consistently reduce calories over a long period of time? Were you able to maintain that weight loss once you went back to eating the amount of calories you were eating before the calorie restriction? My guess is no. Most people don't, because they continue to eat the carbohydrates. The insulin stays up. So once the calories go back up, all the weight comes back. We talked about this, right? That's what happens. One more kicker before I go. If you choose to start reducing your carbohydrates dramatically, if you recognize, hey, I need to get my insulin down because having a whole lot of fat storage hormone in my blood at any given time is not helping the cause here. And so if I want to lose weight, I need to get that lower. And so you decide to reduce your carbohydrates. Well, if you're used to eating a high carbohydrate diet, you're not going to feel very good. And if you've tried to go low carb or keto before, that probably happened to you. You might have gotten shaky because your blood sugar got low because your body's making all this insulin in preparation for carbohydrates you're no longer eating. And that drop in blood sugar makes us feel shaky and weak. You also might drop your insulin quickly and have the effect of, losing like a lot of water. Insulin actually bloats us. It's one more fun thing that it does. Insulin makes us hold fluids. And so when we are successfully able to drop our insulin by changing our diet, we can rapidly lose a bunch of fluid. When you first go on a diet, you lose water weight. Well, that's even more dramatic when you go on a low carbohydrate diet because your insulin is going down as well. When we lose water, we lose salt and electrolytes, and that is actually what makes us feel bad and weak. People call it like the keto flu. What that really is electrolyte imbalance. I'm certainly not going to get into following a very low carb diet in this video, but I just want you to understand it's not without its consequences, especially if you're taking any kind of medicines to lower your blood sugar. You need to talk to your healthcare provider before you make dramatic changes in your diet. And the rest of us, well, you need to be a little bit better informed about how your body handles that abrupt change before you do it. But in the meantime, it's never a bad idea to start giving up the extras. So giving up the sodas, the candies, the chips, the juices, the energy drinks, those concentrated forms of sugar that are really just part of the problem. And the dose makes the poison, so there is a quantity issue as well. So pulling back can certainly help the problem. I know, it's a tough one. I think for the most part, people don't really want to hear that low carb is the answer. But I have dug, I have looked, I have researched, and it really does seem to be the answer. Specifically refined carbs. Because are all carbohydrates bad? Of course not. Do you need to get down to zero? Of course not. Where you need to get, though, is very variable. Very much depends on where you are on this insulin resistance process, how much fat you have to lose. There is a lot. Nobody said it was going to be easy. Make good choices, everybody. Hi, my name is Heather Shucker. I am a nurse practitioner, which means I'm a healthcare provider, but I am not your healthcare provider. All of the information that I'm presenting is meant to be general. If there is something specific to you and your situation, I highly recommend that you speak with your healthcare provider because they know you and your health history, and I do not.